During a live interview, a famous Hollywood actor, Tom Carter, is confronted by a bold journalist who questions his affiliation with a controversial organization. The situation escalates quickly, leading to a public outburst of anger and frustration. As the actor struggles to maintain his image and personal beliefs, the story delves into the psychological toll of living in the public eye and how public expectations can clash with personal realities. As the world watches, the truth begins to unfold in unexpected ways, and the actor is forced to face the consequences of his own choices. It was a sunny afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of perfect day that made the city feel like a movie set. Inside a sleek, modern studio, the cameras were rolling. Tom Carter, the Hollywood heartthrob known for his charismatic roles in blockbuster films, sat in the plush armchair, his usual calm demeanor in place. But today was different. Today, the stakes were higher. The interviewer, Jonathan Pierce, a journalist with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions, leaned forward with an almost predatory look. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice smooth yet laced with something more dangerous. "You've always been very private about your involvement with the Church of Scientology. Don't you think the public deserves to know more about your beliefs?" Tom's smile faltered for a brief moment. The question hit too close to home, a territory he'd carefully avoided for years. He could feel the weight of the spotlight on him, the world watching, waiting for his response. "Jonathan, my beliefs are personal," Tom replied, his voice steady, but betraying a hint of tension. "I think it's important to focus on the work I do, not my personal life." But Jonathan wasn't done. "Isn't it true that your involvement with Scientology has influenced your career in ways we can't ignore? You've surrounded yourself with like-minded individuals, and yet, you refuse to discuss it. Why the secrecy?" The question hung in the air, a silent challenge. Tom's eyes narrowed, and the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a battle. The tension in the room grew palpable, like a storm on the horizon. Tom's hands gripped the armrests of the chair, his knuckles turning white. He had navigated his career through countless interviews, but this one felt different. Jonathan Pierce was no longer just a journalist. He had become an adversary, and Tom could feel the claws of the public's curiosity sinking deeper into him. Lights overhead flickered slightly, and Tom's mind raced, searching for the right words to deflect, to end this line of questioning. He had built his career on charm, on the image of the ever-in-control Hollywood star, but today, that image was crumbling. The world saw him as a symbol, someone untouchable, someone who had it all. But the truth was, he wasn't as strong as they thought. "Look, Jonathan," Tom said, his voice more firm now, "I understand the public's need to know everything about celebrities, but there are some things that remain private. My faith, my beliefs, they're not a spectacle for the media to dissect." Jonathan's smile didn't waver. "But your beliefs shape who you are, don't they? And if they shape you, then they shape your work, your roles. It's not just a matter of privacy anymore. It's a matter of accountability." The words stung, sharper than any criticism Tom had faced in his career. He had spent years crafting the perfect image, ensuring that his personal life remained just that personal. But now, it seemed, there were cracks in the facade, and the public was eager to peer inside. Tom shifted in his seat, struggling to keep his composure. "I don't owe anyone an explanation for who I am or what I believe," he said, his voice slightly more strained. "What I owe is my best performance. That's what people pay to see." Jonathan leaned back, eyes never leaving Tom's face. "But what if your best performance isn't enough anymore? What if the audience wants to know more about the man behind the roles?" The question lingered, and for a moment, Tom wasn't sure if he was still talking to Jonathan or to the public, the millions of eyes watching him. He could feel the weight of their expectations, their judgments, pressing down on him. The interview had started with the usual pleasantries, but now it was spiraling into something much darker, something much more personal. Tom wasn't just being questioned by a journalist, he was being interrogated by the world. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around Tom. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. It wasn't just the interview that was overwhelming. It was the realization that this moment could define him, could destroy him. His public persona had been carefully crafted, and this could ruin it all. Jonathan pressed on, sensing blood in the water. "People like you, Tom, they live in the spotlight, but when you hide parts of yourself, it feels manipulative, doesn't it?" Tom clenched his jaw, fighting the anger rising in his chest. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm just not parading my private life for you to consume," he snapped, his voice finally breaking through the calm exterior. The words, though fierce, were heavy with frustration. He hadn't meant to let it slip, but the pressure had been building for years. The audience gasped, and for a brief moment, Tom saw the shift in Jonathan's eyes. It wasn't just about Scientology anymore. This had become a fight for control. "You're right about one thing," Tom continued, his voice now steady but with an edge of bitterness. "People in this industry, we're put on a pedestal. We're expected to be perfect, to have all the answers. But we're human, too. And sometimes, Being human means dealing with things we can't always explain. Jonathan's lips curled into a knowing smile. So you admit there's more to the story? Tom hesitated. The truth was, there was more to the story. But did he dare tell it? Could he risk unraveling everything he had worked so hard to build? The pressure was too much. And yet, deep down, he knew the answer. For the first time in his career, Tom was no longer just playing a role. He was living one. The silence that followed Tom's last words felt like an eternity. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of the tension that filled the room. For the first time, Tom could feel his carefully crafted persona slipping away, piece by piece. The actor who had been untouchable, the man who had mastered the art of the perfect response, was now exposed to vulnerable, raw human. Jonathan didn't let the silence last long. He seized the opportunity, pushing forward with his next question, sharper than ever. So, you admit that there's a part of you you've kept hidden, Tom, something you don't want the world to know. Tom took a slow breath, his mind spinning. He wanted to lash out, to defend himself against the probing accusations, but deep down, he knew that any attempt to regain control now would make it worse. This wasn't just about Scientology anymore. This was about his entire life, his choices, his relationships, his identity. You don't get it, Jonathan, Tom said, his voice a little quieter now, almost weary. It's not about keeping secrets. It's about protecting the people I care about. You think you can ask me one question, and I'm supposed to just bear it all. That's not how this works. Jonathan, sensing the vulnerability in Tom's voice, leaned in closer, his eyes cold with the sharpness of a seasoned interviewer. But that's exactly what we want to know, isn't it? Who's the real Tom Carter? The one behind the glossy magazine covers, the red carpets, the movies. Who is he when the cameras aren't rolling? Tom closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though the question hit him in a way he hadn't expected. The real Tom Carter was something he had buried long ago, locked away in a world far removed from the spotlight. The real him was just a man, with doubts, fears, and regrets. And right now, that man was standing in front of millions of people, exposed and fragile. The facade had always been an act that had worked, until now. I don't know, Tom finally whispered, almost as if to himself. I don't know who I am anymore. There it was, the admission that would change everything. He had given up the one thing he had spent his entire career protecting, his image. In that instant, Tom realized the cost of living a life under constant scrutiny. The public didn't just want the hero on the screen. They wanted to tear apart the man behind it. Jonathan's expression softened. Just for a second, Tom, I didn't mean to corner you. But you've been holding this in for so long. It's affecting everything around you. Your career, your relationships, your sanity. Tom let out a shaky laugh. You think this is about my sanity, he said, his tone bitter. My whole life's been about pretending to be something I'm not. And maybe I'm just tired of it. Tired of trying to keep up with everyone's expectations. Jonathan nodded slowly, his demeanor shifting from confrontation to something more empathetic. I can see that. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. Tom looked down at his hands, his mind racing. Was it too late? Had he already destroyed his career with this one moment of honesty? The truth was, he didn't know. But he did know one thing. He couldn't go back to the man he was before. The man who had lived a life dictated by others' expectations. The man who had sacrificed parts of himself to remain in the spotlight. The truth had come out, and now, there was no going back. The interview didn't end there. The cameras kept rolling, the studio lights harsh against the growing tension. But what had started as an interrogation had transformed into something much more. An unfiltered look at the cost of fame, the loneliness of living under constant public scrutiny, and the consequences of refusing to be honest with oneself. When the cameras finally stopped, Tom stood up, his legs shaky, his face pale. Jonathan stood as well, watching him, no longer the adversary, but something else, a witness. Thank you, Tom, Jonathan said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of respect. I think we've gotten more than we bargained for today. Tom didn't reply immediately. He couldn't. His mind was still spinning from the revelation, the chaos that had unraveled in front of millions of people. He had known that fame came with its costs, but he had never fully understood what that meant until now. As he walked off the stage, his assistant rushed up to him, her face a mixture of concern and disbelief. Tom, what just happened? He shook his head, the weight of it all pressing down on him. I don't know. I think I've just destroyed everything. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft. Maybe, but you also gave the world something real. And maybe, just maybe, that's the part they'll remember. The drive back to his apartment was a blur. The city of Los Angeles, always bustling with life, seemed distant to Tom. He had been through countless public scandals, rumors, and whispered gossip, but nothing compared to what had just transpired. It was as if the walls were closing in on him from all sides. His phone buzzed incessantly on the passenger seat. Messages flooding in from his agent, his PR team, and even some close friends. He ignored them all. It didn't matter. What had happened was bigger than a few bad press reviews or negative headlines. It was his identity that was now under fire. Arriving home, Tom stepped out of the car and into the lobby of his apartment building, the weight of the world on his shoulders. His doorman looked at him with a subtle expression of surprise, but quickly masked it with a forced smile. "Evening, Mr. Carter," he greeted. Tom nodded, too exhausted to speak. Upstairs in his penthouse, the stillness of the space seemed foreign, as though the apartment no longer belonged to him. He walked to the large window, gazing out over the city. It was a perfect view, the glittering lights below a sharp contrast to the turmoil inside him. His phone buzzed again. "PR team, Tom, we need to address the situation immediately. Your reputation is at risk. We recommend a public statement." Tom stared at the message, feeling an overwhelming sense of defeat. He had spent years building this life, this persona, and in just a few minutes it felt like it could all come crashing down. He set the phone down, letting it buzz away as his thoughts spiraled. What could he even say to fix this? Could he go back to playing the part of the untouchable star? For the first time in a long time, Tom wondered if the real world outside of the movies, outside of the scripts, was a place he could survive. The following days were a blur of media frenzy. News outlets across the globe played the interview, on loop, dissecting every word, every gesture. Headlines screamed, "Tom Carter finally reveals his true self," and Hollywood's golden boy strips away the mask. It was as though Tom had opened a door, and now, there was no way to close it. His agent, Mark, called him at least 5 times a day, each conversation more frantic than the last. "Tom, we need to issue a statement. We need to control the narrative. Do you understand? This is getting out of hand." Tom had heard it all before. Control the narrative. Fix the image. But now, in the wake of the interview, he wasn't sure that narrative could be controlled anymore. There was no going back. His phone pinged again, and for the first time, Tom decided to read the message. Julia, his ex-wife, "I saw the interview. I'm glad you're finally being real. But are you ready for what comes next?" It was simple, but it hit him in a way nothing else had. Julia had always been the one person who truly understood him, who saw past the fame and the glitz. The fact that she acknowledged his truth made something shift within him. But her final question lingered. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Tom wasn't sure. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. The backlash came swiftly. Social media erupted with a mixture of admiration and condemnation. Some fans praised his honesty, applauding him for showing vulnerability in a world that demanded perfection. Others, however, were less forgiving. They felt betrayed, disillusioned by the man they had admired for years. "Tom Carter's nothing but a fraud," one user tweeted. "The man we saw on screen was just a character, not real." It stung. The words felt like knives, piercing through the facade that had been so carefully constructed. Tom had spent his life curating an image, pleasing the public, and now the very thing he had worshipped, his image, was being torn apart. Despite the negativity, there were moments of solace. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his old acting coach, Peter. "Peter, you did the right thing. Tom, the truth will always be your greatest strength, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. People may not understand, but they'll respect you for it in time." It was one of the few things that had given him comfort in the past few days. Peter had been there for him when no one else had, guiding him not just in acting, but in life. It was a small reminder that not everything had to be perfect, that there was room for imperfection, maybe even growth. Tom knew he couldn't hide forever. The media storm would pass, but the real challenge was what lay ahead, rebuilding his life, his career, himself. He called Mark the next morning. "I want to meet with you. I need to figure out where I go from here." The PR team had their own plans, but Tom needed more than damage control. He needed to rediscover who he was outside of the public's expectations. He needed a way to move forward, not just as Tom Carter, the movie star, but as Tom, the man who had learned to embrace his imperfections. Mark arrived at his apartment, with a stern look, a stack of papers in hand. "We've got to act quickly, Tom. There are offers on the table, but the media's calling for an apology. You have to decide where you stand." Tom looked at the papers, the glossy offers, the expected PR responses. He felt suffocated by it all. "I can't do it anymore, Mark," he said, his voice steady. "I won't apologize for being honest. I'll deal with the fallout, but I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not." Mark's eyes widened slightly, but then softened. "If that's what you want, then we'll figure it out. But just know, Tom, the world doesn't forgive easily." Tom nodded. "I know, but I've lived my whole life pretending to be perfect. It's time to face whatever comes next, no matter how hard it is." The next few months were a whirlwind. The media continued to scrutinize Tom's every move, but something had changed. The world had watched as he fell apart in front of them, but now, they were watching as he rebuilt himself from the ground up. He turned down lucrative film roles, choosing, instead, to work on smaller, independent projects that felt more authentic to him. He began speaking out about the pressure of fame, about the cost of living under constant scrutiny. His honesty, once seen as a weakness, began to be viewed as a strength. For the first time in his life, Tom Carter felt free. The public's expectations no longer defined him. He was no longer just the character on screen, the perfect hero. He was a man, a flawed, imperfect man, but one who had learned to embrace his truth. And as he walked down the street one day, past the billboards and flashing cameras, he didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. Instead, he felt lighter, like he was finally living for himself, not for anyone else. Tom's decision to step away from the Hollywood machine felt like both a liberation and a burden. He had always been defined by his roles, by the fame and the expectations that came with it. But now, without the mask of a perfect movie star, he was left with the raw, unfiltered truth of who he wasn't. That was something neither easy nor comfortable. He spent more time at home, rediscovering things he'd long neglected. The quiet moments once filled with anxiety over the next project or the next red carpet became the ones he cherished. There was something profound in the silence, in the ability to just exist without the eyes of the world constantly watching. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Every so often, he would receive messages from former colleagues, friends, and agents, urging him to return to the public sphere, to reclaim his place in Hollywood. There were offers to attend high-profile events, to promote big-budget films. The old Tom Carter, the one who lived for applause and recognition, was being called back. Yet, every time, he turned them down. It wasn't about rejecting the world he had known. It was about rejecting the person he had been forced to become. One day, as he was having coffee at a local cafe, a stranger approached him. He was a young man, no more than 25, with a hesitant smile and a shy demeanor. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter, can I talk to you for a moment?" the man asked. Tom looked up from his coffee, surprised. The cafe was quiet, and he hadn't expected anyone to recognize him here. Still, he gestured for the man to sit. "You're the actor, right?" the young man continued. "I used to watch your movies when I was a kid. You're the perfect hero. But I saw the interview, the one where you talked about being real, about letting go of the Tom's heart sank. He had hoped the world might forget about that interview, but it seemed it had changed everything. Yet there was something different in the man's tone, something sincere. "I just wanted to say," the man continued, "that what you said really hit me. I've always felt like I had to be perfect for everyone around me, my family, my friends, even my social media followers. But seeing you admit your flaws, it made me realize that maybe I don't have to keep pretending. Maybe I can just be me." Tom sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the man's words. It was strange to hear someone say that, to know that his own vulnerability had impacted someone else so profoundly. It was something he hadn't expected when he made the decision to step away from the perfect image. "You don't have to be perfect," Tom said softly, looking the young man in the eyes. "None of us do. We're all just trying to figure things out, and it's okay to not have all the answers." The man smiled, nodding. "Thanks. I think I needed to hear that." As the man walked away, Tom sat back in his chair, a strange sense of peace washing over him. Maybe, just maybe, he had made the right choice. His truth wasn't just his own, it was something that others could learn from. 2 months passed, and the world slowly moved on. The media had found a new scandal to latch onto, a new star to worship, and Tom faded into the background. But he didn't mind. He had found something more important than fame, his own sense of purpose. One day, while walking through the city, he passed by a small theater, its marquee flashing with the name of an upcoming play. The name struck a chord with him. The real me, the irony wasn't lost on him. The next morning, he went to the theater and signed up. The play was an experimental one, something far outside his comfort zone, something raw and vulnerable. Like his recent journey, the director was open to the idea of casting someone with Tom's fame, but only under one condition. He had to be willing to strip away his star persona entirely. There was no makeup, no scripts about heroes or villains, raw emotion, real human experiences. And for the first time, Tom didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. Opening night arrived, and Tom stood backstage, feeling a rush of nerves. This wasn't the comfort of a movie set, where everything was scripted and controlled. This was live. This was real. The theater was small, but the audience was filled with those who came for something different. Something genuine. As the curtain rose, Tom stepped out onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding, but instead of feeling like it was suffocating him, it felt like a welcoming embrace. This was where he belonged, not as the Hollywood star, but as the man who had shed the masks and was ready to face the world, flaws, and all. The play began, and as Tom delivered his lines, something unexpected happened. He didn't feel like he was acting. He felt like he was living. Every word, every movement was a reflection of his own journey, his own pain, his own growth, and the audience responded. They didn't just watch him, they connected with him, with his humanity. When the curtain fell, the applause was overwhelming, but it didn't feel the same as the applause he had received for blockbuster films. This was different. It was genuine, unfiltered, real. After the play's successful run, Tom started receiving offers again, But this time, they were different. They weren't the big-budget films that once defined his career. They were smaller, more intimate roles, characters who weren't perfect, who weren't heroes, but who were just as flawed and real as he was. He took those roles, one by one, finding new meaning in each of them. There was no longer a need to play a character who lived up to an impossible standard. Now, he played characters who struggled, who faltered, and who, liked him, were learning to accept their imperfections. Tom Carter, the movie star, had been replaced by something far more powerful. Tom Carter, the man. Years passed, and Tom's name continued to be associated with one of the most significant comebacks in Hollywood history. But this wasn't a comeback based on recapturing his former fame. It was a comeback based on authenticity. He wasn't the perfect leading man anymore, and he didn't need to be. Tom had learned to embrace the messiness of life, and in doing so, he found a deeper connection with the people who watched him. He wasn't a hero on the screen anymore. Instead, he had become a hero in his own right by showing others that it was okay to not have everything figured out. It was okay to fall, to stumble, and to rise again, stronger and more human than ever. And in the end, that was the legacy that mattered most. After his success in theater and independent films, Tom started to notice a change not just in his career, but in his daily life. He no longer felt the overwhelming pressure to impress or conform. The constant battle for public approval had faded, and in its place, a more grounded sense of self took root. Instead of walking into every room with the anticipation of cameras flashing or critics waiting, Tom found solace in quieter moments. Early morning walks through the city, visits to local coffee shops, or simply reading a book by the window had become his new way of living. He cherished the anonymity that came with stepping out of the spotlight. But there were still occasional moments when the world tried to pull him back. A big-name director would call, or a prestigious award show would send an invitation. At first, the temptation to return to the glamorous life was hard to resist. But then, he'd look around at his life, his small circle of friends, his peaceful mornings, and he'd realize that this was where he wanted to be. He didn't need to chase the limelight anymore. Despite his desire for peace, Tom couldn't completely leave the world of filmmaking behind. After several months of reflection, he was approached by an up-and-coming director with a unique vision. It wasn't a superhero movie or an action-packed blockbuster. It was a deeply personal film about a man coming to terms with his past, his mistakes, and his redemption. The character was unlike any Tom had ever played, but something about the story resonated with him. "I want to tell a story that matters," Tom told the director. "One that isn't just about the spectacle, but about the heart of the human experience." The director smiled, sensing the authenticity in Tom's voice. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. We need someone who's not afraid to show the real side of things." And so, Tom dove into the project with a fervor he hadn't felt in years. He spent hours studying the script, working with the cast, and bringing the character to life in a way that felt real to him, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't about playing a hero anymore. It was about playing a person. As the film began to take shape, Tom often found himself reflecting on his own journey. He thought back to the days when he had been just another struggling actor, desperate for fame and validation. He remembered the early days of superstardom, the rush of premieres, and the highs of box office success. But now, as he stood in front of the camera once more, he realized that the real reward wasn't in the applause or the accolades. It was in the process, the collaboration, the honesty, and the catharsis of creating something genuine. It was also in the lessons he had learned. Fame hadn't defined him. The mistakes hadn't broken him. What had shaped him, ultimately, was his willingness to be vulnerable, to shed the layers that no longer served him, and to embrace who he truly was. The success of this new film wasn't about how much money it made or how many awards it won. It was about the connections it sparked, the conversations. It started about identity, vulnerability, and redemption. People didn't just come to watch a movie. They came to see a piece of real life unfold on the screen. And that, Tom realized, was what made his work meaningful. In the months following the release of the film, Tom found himself spending more time with people who shared his new outlook on life. One of those people was Anna, a fellow actor he had met during a theater production. Anna was much younger than him, but she shared the same values and authenticity that Tom had come to cherish. They started dating quietly, away from the paparazzi's prying eyes. Their relationship wasn't a spectacle. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, shared passions, and an understanding that fame was not the defining factor in their lives. They spent evenings cooking dinner, talking about their craft, and dreaming of projects that mattered. There were no publicists, no flashy events, just two people discovering the beauty of a simple life. For Tom, it was a reminder that love wasn't something that needed to be flaunted for the world to see. It was something personal, something sacred. Despite his desire to remain out of the limelight, Tom's film began to gain significant attention. It was praised for its emotional depth and honesty, and soon, the media was buzzing again about Tom's comeback. But this time, it felt different. The world wasn't looking for the perfect star. They were looking for the man who had learned to embrace his flaws and tell his truth. One evening, as he sat down with an old friend from the press, Tom reflected on his journey. "I never imagined I'd get to a place like this," he said. "I used to be terrified of what people would think. Now, I don't even care." His friend laughed. "You've come a long way, Tom." Tom smiled, realizing just how true that was. He had spent so many years chasing perfection, trying to live up to other people's expectations, but in the end, it wasn't about perfection. It was about being real. Despite his newfound peace, there were still moments when Tom felt the weight of his past decisions. Old habits, insecurities, and fears would creep in at unexpected times. He often found himself wondering if the world had truly accepted him for who he was, or if he was still just another figure for the media to dissect and scrutinize. Anna, sensing his discomfort, would often remind him that the only approval that mattered was his own. "You've spent your whole life trying to please others, Tom, but now you get to choose. You're the one who gets to define what's important." Her words echoed in his mind. Slowly but surely, Tom began to shed the last remnants of self that had clung to him. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. He had already proven everything he needed to by living authentically. As the years passed, Tom's impact on Hollywood became undeniable. He was no longer just a famous actor. He was a symbol of what it meant to be real in a world that often valued perfection over authenticity. His films continued to push boundaries, challenging audiences to confront their own ideas of identity, fame, and success. But it wasn't just his acting that left a lasting legacy. It was his willingness to speak out about the pressures of fame, to shed light on the struggles that many stars faced behind the scenes. He spoke candidly about his journey with the press, encouraging others to embrace their flaws, to seek help when they needed it, and to stop pretending to be something they weren't. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when the weight of the world felt too heavy. But Tom had learned that true strength wasn't in how many trophies you won or how many people admired you. True strength was in the courage to be vulnerable, to live your truth, and to inspire others to do the same. Tom was offered a role unlike any he had ever taken before. It wasn't a blockbuster or a high-budget production. It was an autobiographical piece about a man who had lived in the public eye for years, struggling to balance the pressures of fame with the need to be authentic. The character was based on him, his struggles, his journey. At first, Tom hesitated. It was one thing to tell others to be real. It was another to lay bare his own life in front of the world. But after months of reflection, he decided to take the role. It felt like the ultimate challenge to be both the artist and the art. As the film was released, it caused an uproar. Audiences were captivated by its raw honesty, the way it portrayed the complexity of fame, and the cost of living a life in the public eye. Critics praised Tom's performance, calling it the role of his career. They noted the vulnerability he brought to the screen, something they hadn't seen from him before. But more than that, the film sparked a larger conversation about the expectations placed on public figures. Fans and critics alike were drawn to its message about the pressures of perfection and the importance of self-acceptance. Sitting in his apartment one evening, Tom watched the film from the comfort of his couch. He could see the vulnerability in every scene, the raw emotions that had once terrified him to show. He could see how far he had come, how much he had grown. The fame, the wealth, the roles, they no longer defined him. What defined him now was his ability to live authentically, to embrace the imperfections that had once felt like burdens. He smiled, content. For the first time in his life, Tom Carter was truly free. With the success of his recent film, Tom's reputation as an actor who valued authenticity grew. People across the industry started to see him not just as an actor, but as a catalyst for change in a system that often prioritized perfection over humanity. New filmmakers approached him with projects focused on issues of mental health, the struggles of fame, and the emotional costs of public life. One particular project caught his attention. It was a documentary about the impact of social media on personal identity. The filmmaker, a passionate young woman named Lucy, asked if Tom would be willing to speak about his own experience with public scrutiny, the toll it had taken on his self-image, and how he had learned to navigate the pressure to constantly appear perfect. At first, Tom hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to bare his soul in such an intimate way again. But Lucy's sincerity resonated with him. "I want to show people the reality," she said, "not just the glamour or the highlight reel. I want them to see that even the most famous, the most admired, have their own struggles." After a long pause, Tom agreed. He realized that this was another opportunity to help others, another chance to be real, to show that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. The filming of the documentary was intense. For weeks, Tom opened up in ways he had never done before, sharing personal stories of the pressures of being in the public eye, the dark moments when he had felt isolated despite being surrounded by thousands of fans, and the struggle to maintain a facade of perfection. The more he spoke, the more he felt liberated from the weight of the image he had carried for years. Lucy's team worked tirelessly, capturing Tom in moments of reflection, in interviews, and even in the quiet of his everyday life. She made sure to show the reality of his life outside of the spotlight. Tom cooking dinner in his kitchen, working on a script, or walking through his neighborhood without the glare of cameras. There were no grandiose sets, no glam shots, the simple moments that defined who he was. Now, the final product was raw, honest, and deeply moving. The documentary not only resonated with those who had admired Tom for his acting, but also reached a new audience, those who had felt the same pressures of perfection in their own lives. Whether they were in the spotlight or not, the documentary had a profound impact. It sparked conversations about mental health, the dangers of comparison, and the harmful effects of unrealistic standards set by both the media and social platforms. People began to reach out to Tom, thanking him for his honesty, for giving them the courage to embrace their own flaws. The conversations continued to ripple outward. Tom became an advocate for social media reform, speaking at conferences and in interviews about how platforms could be redesigned to foster more authentic interactions and less toxic comparison. He wasn't trying to change the world single-handedly, but he knew that by using his platform in a more responsible way, he could be part of a larger movement towards self-acceptance. As he continued to speak out, the media, once critical and fascinated by his every move, began to view him differently. He wasn't just a former movie star, he had become a thought leader, someone who had turned his journey of self-discovery into a powerful message for millions. Tom's influence reached beyond his generation. Young actors, influencers, and creators started to look up to him, not for his fame or his box office numbers, but for his willingness to redefine success. He spoke openly to emerging talent, encouraging them to stay true to themselves, to be mindful of the pressures they would face, and to build careers on authenticity rather than fleeting trends. He was often invited to mentor young actors, but instead of offering the typical advice about fame and fortune, he taught them the importance of emotional well-being. The industry will try to shape you, he would say, but you have to shape yourself first. Know who you are, and everything else will fall into place. Tom's efforts helped cultivate a new generation of creatives who valued their mental health and personal growth over the superficial aspects of fame. This, he believed, was the most important legacy he could leave. One of the most profound aspects of Tom's transformation was his relationship with his family. Over the years, as he had been consumed with his career, he had drifted away from those closest to him. His relationship with his parents had always been complicated, and after years of trying to prove himself to them, he had distanced himself in ways he couldn't quite understand at the time. But now, as his life had come full circle, he began to repair those relationships. He reconnected with his parents and his siblings, making up for lost time. It wasn't easy. There was still a lingering tension from the past, old wounds that hadn't healed, but there was a mutual understanding now that hadn't been there before. They no longer saw him as just the famous son. They saw him as Tom, the man who had been through struggles, who had faced his own demons, and who had come out on the other side stronger. Family dinners became a cherished tradition, and for the first time in years, Tom felt that his home was a place of true peace, free from expectations. Tom's life now was far different from the chaotic, celebrity-driven world he had once known. His days were filled with simple pleasures: gardening in his backyard, spending quiet evenings with Anna, taking long hikes in nature, and savoring the company of his closest friends. Fame had not vanished completely, but it no longer consumed him. He spent more time in creative projects that mattered, working with people who shared his values. He even started writing his own scripts, exploring stories about real-life heroes, the everyday people who navigated complex lives with strength and grace. Tom found fulfillment not in the red carpets or the flashing lights, but in the moments of connection. It wasn't about grand gestures or accolades. It was about living life authentically, quietly, and meaningfully. Years passed, and Tom's career began to slow down. He took fewer roles, and his presence in Hollywood became less frequent. But in the few films he chose to do, his impact was undeniable. He continued to prioritize roles that felt true to who he had become, characters who were deeply human, flawed, and real. One day, while sitting with Anna, he talked about stepping away from acting for good. He had no regrets about his journey. The films, the fame, the interviews, they were all part of a larger experience, one that had helped him discover who he really was. But now, he felt it was time to focus on other pursuits. "I've lived a life that most people would envy," he said, "but now I want to enjoy the simplicity of it all. The quiet moments, the real moments." Tom's final public appearance was at a small ceremony for an award he had won for lifetime achievement. It wasn't an event filled with glitz and glamour. It was intimate, filled with a handful of close friends and colleagues who had supported him over the years. When he took the stage, the applause was warm but not overwhelming. The audience knew that Tom had given his all. He had been both a star and a human being. And now, he was choosing to leave that life behind. "I've spent so many years living for others," he said in his speech, "and now, I want to live for myself, for those I love, and for the things that truly matter. Thank you all for the journey." As he left the stage, he felt a deep sense of peace. he was finally free. After retiring from acting, Tom focused on giving back. He started a foundation to support young people in the arts, focusing on mental health and the importance of emotional well-being in creative industries. The foundation became his new passion project, helping to create spaces for young creatives to thrive without the pressures of fame. His days were now filled with speaking engagements, mentoring and supporting the next generation of filmmakers, writers, and artists. He spent less time in the spotlight and more time in the background, using his position to create lasting change in the industry. He also took up painting, finding a new form of expression that allowed him to explore the complexities of his own emotions in a way that words could not. Tom Carter had come full circle. From the young man chasing fame to the older man who had embraced simplicity and authenticity, he had found peace. The noise of the world had quieted, and in its place, a calm understanding had taken root. He now lived in a house by the sea with Anna, surrounded by nature, family, and close friends. Life was simple, but it was rich in meaning. And in the end, Tom realized that the greatest victory wasn't in being the most famous actor or the most successful. It was in finding contentment with who you are, imperfections and all. The last chapters of Tom's life weren't marked by grand achievements or public triumphs. Instead, they were defined by the small, quiet acts of kindness, mentorship, and self-reflection that impacted those closest to him. Tom became a living testament to the idea that happiness was found not in what the world demanded of you, but in what you allowed yourself to give. He passed away peacefully, leaving behind a legacy not of box office records, but of truth and authenticity. People remembered him not for his films, but for his courage to live as he truly was. Years after Tom's passing, Anna discovered a collection of letters that Tom had written throughout his life, letters to his future self, to his friends, to his family, and even to his younger self. These letters weren't filled with grand declarations of fame or wealth. Instead, they were reflections on his journey, his doubts, his growth, and his desire for peace. Anna decided to share them with the world as they captured the essence of who Tom had truly been. They revealed a side of him that no one had seen, a side that was deeply introspective, vulnerable, and honest. In one letter, Tom wrote, "To the person reading this, remember that the pursuit of perfection is a trap. It's the imperfections that define us, that make us human. Don't chase what the world tells you is important. Chase what feels real. Be kind to yourself. And always, always remember to laugh." The letters became a posthumous memoir, filled with wisdom and insights from someone who had lived both in the public eye and in the quiet corners of his own life. It was a tribute to the man he had become, and the world took notice. His final words became a guiding light for many, especially those struggling to find their own place in a world that often seemed consumed by superficiality. After Tom's passing, his foundation continued to flourish. The young people who had benefited from his mentorship and support now carried on his work, creating an ever-growing network of artists, activists, and mental health advocates. His message about authenticity, mental health, and self had become the cornerstone of a new movement. Anna took on a leading role in the foundation, ensuring that Tom's vision remained intact. She often spoke at events, telling the story of how Tom had changed not only her life, but also the lives of so many others. She would often quote one of Tom's favorite sayings: "The most important thing in life is to show up, even when you don't have all the answers, just be there, and the rest will follow." The foundation's work inspired countless young people to pursue their passions without sacrificing their mental well-being. It became a beacon for those who needed not just financial help, but emotional guidance and the reassurance that their worth wasn't tied to the world's fleeting standards. Though Tom was no longer around to witness it, his influence continued to shape the world of cinema. Years after his retirement, a group of filmmakers, many of whom had worked with him, decided to create a documentary about his life. But instead of focusing on his Hollywood career or his iconic roles, they focused on the man behind the fame, his inner struggles, his battles with mental health, his desire to live authentically in a world that demanded he be something he was not. The documentary, titled The Real Tom, was released to critical acclaim. It was lauded for its honesty, its raw portrayal of fame, and the complexity of the man who had once been one of the most famous stars in the world. The film showcased Tom's quiet, reflective nature, and revealed his legacy in a way that had never been seen before. It inspired a new generation of actors, filmmakers, and ordinary people to be honest about their struggles and to find strength in vulnerability. Decades after Tom's passing, the world still remembered him not for his blockbuster hits, but for the way he had lived his life. His legacy wasn't measured by awards or box office numbers, but by the countless lives he had touched with his message of authenticity, mental health awareness, and self-acceptance. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, a memorial service was held in his honor. It wasn't a grand, star-studded event, but a simple gathering of people whose lives had been transformed by Tom's life and work. His old friends, family, and fans would gather to reflect on the man who had been a quiet hero in his own right. In a final tribute, a park in his favorite coastal town was dedicated to a place where young people could come to relax, to create, to find inspiration, and to remember that fame was fleeting, but authenticity lasted forever. Tom Carter's journey had been one of self-discovery, authenticity, and resilience. From a life lived in the spotlight to a peaceful existence surrounded by loved ones. His story was a testament to the power of living true to oneself. His legacy, though quiet, was a legacy that would continue to inspire for generations to come.